You know what? There's so many misconceptions about power. We think it's dominance and control and hierarchy, but it's not. If you actually look at the definition of power, power is the capacity and the ability to direct or influence the behavior of others or a course of events.
Right.
So we're really talking about our own power to be able to direct and influence others or events.
Welcome to the Audacious Living Podcast, hosted by my man, Audley Stevenson, the Odd Man. He'll unpack wisdom and insights from a cross-section of top quality performers in business, media, sports, entertainment, and lifestyle to uncover key elements to help you live your best audacious life ever. So without further ado, here is the Odd Man.
Greetings and salutations, Audley Stevenson, and welcome to another edition of the Audacious Living Podcast. And I can promise you that you will not find another podcast more audacious than this one. I encourage you to scour the internet and check it out, but it just won't happen. So again, I thank you for being here, and I really appreciate you taking time and being on this journey with us as we continue our ongoing goal of helping you live your best audacious life ever. I'd encourage you to connect with us through our social media channels. You can find us on Twitter and Instagram under the handle The Audacious Pod. And then if you head over to Facebook, you can search The Audacious Living Podcast. And then if you happen to be watching this episode on our YouTube channel, then you can easily subscribe to our YouTube channel by tapping the notification bell, and you are a subscriber and connected. So please find a way to be a part of our community. Like, follow, subscribe, share. Let's keep this conversation of audaciousness going. Now, we're going to spend some time on the podcast today discussing the topic of personal power. It's something that we're all familiar with. There's no doubt about that. But I don't necessarily think we all define it the exact same way. Now, to get us on the same page here, allow me to offer up the definition of personal power, which is the ability to influence people or events with or without formal authority. Now, the without part will probably catch a lot of people off guard and be surprised, because oftentimes people equate personal power to authority, right? You've got the authority, then you've got the power. But in actuality, personal power is more of a person's attitude or state of mind, rather than an attempt to maneuver or control others. It's something that we all have, but we always don't recognize it. That sets the stage perfectly for today's guest, Gail Rudolph. She's the author of the new book, Power Up, Power Down: How to Reclaim Control and Make Every Situation a Win-Win. You know, Gail has had years of experience as an executive maneuvering the power dynamics, if you will, and they've transformed her into the go-to expert on how to harness interpersonal power and, again, create win-win outcomes for everyone. Gail has the distinction of being one of 13 people globally and only one of 2 women in the U.S. to be credentialed to teach the 6 principles of persuasion based on the research of the godfather of influence himself, Dr. Robert Cialdini. So definitely a big deal. And again, understanding the connection between power and influence, it just makes sense. You know, Gail and I had a power-packed conversation, and that pun was fully intended, and I'm certain that all of you will appreciate it. So without any further ado, here's my conversation with Gail Rudolph. Enjoy. Gail, thanks for being here on the Audacious Living Podcast. It is such a pleasure to have you.
It's such a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Yes, I was really looking forward to this conversation. And I'll tell you, we'll talk about your book, Power Up, Power Down, and all the good stuff you have going on with that. But even just the topic of power, I think it fits very nice into the context of audaciousness and what that means. And I think there's a really, really nice fit. And so we certainly want to get into that as well. But I just think this makes sense to me to have you here.
Oh, well, it's like I said, it's my pleasure. And if we can help people and help your audience become more empowered today, then we have a success on our hands.
There you go. Then let's do it. Let's do it. So let's first off get into and more so to make sure that we're all on the same page here. Maybe a sort of a definition of power. I think we all we hear. I think people understand it, but if just to make sure we're in sync, if you will.
You know what? There's so many misconceptions about power. We think it's dominance and control and hierarchy, but it's not. If you actually look at the definition of power, power is the capacity and the ability to direct or influence the behavior of others or a course of events.
Right.
So we're really talking about our own power to be able to direct and influence others or events.
Right. So our personal power, basically, we all have that.
Yes, we all have it. We just don't tap into it all the time.
So let's touch on that. Why is that? And I know it's a very big question, but in terms of why more people don't tap into it, is it more a recognition they don't know they have it, or is there something else going on here?
I think it is that we don't realize we have it. We don't realize that energy or, power is actually energy. It's our energy. It happens. It ebbs and flows with every conversation we have.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
And we don't know how to step into our power in the appropriate way.
Right.
So when we talk about power, it's both a verbal and a nonverbal communication, but we have to realize there's two sides to the same coin.
Okay.
And when we talk about powering up, a lot of times that people think that powering up is getting mad, dominance and control over other people. But when we talk about power up, when I talk about power up, it's about a choice that we make to step into a fuller presence.
Right.
But we also have the ability to power down. And power down is kind of intentionally changing our stance, expressing empathy to actually level the playing field of the power energy that's going back and forth in the conversation or the interaction that's happening.
So then, if I'm hearing right, then essentially there's some situations where powering up is appropriate and others where you need to power down. Is that kind of what you're hinting towards?
Exactly. And what we try to teach, or I try to help people understand, is that it's what Viktor Frankl says, right? That there's that period of that time between a stimulus and a response in which we have a choice we can make.
Right.
And it's becoming aware of that choice and then deciding if it's better to power up or power down.
Right.
And we learned so much about that. I mean, some of the most powerful people that we know were masters at powering down. I mean, look at Martin Luther King. He used the powering down the majority of time. Very seldom did we see him power up.
So let's give us an image of what powering down looks like. So you use Martin Luther King as an example. What specifically did he do that's so masterful?
Well, he held his power and he didn't actually confront people. What we know is that when people get pushed, our automatically response is to push back, right?
The back goes up, right?
And that's what we're talking about. Then we get in power struggles. You're just fighting over everything. You're trying, this power struggle, this dynamics going on. And if you ever have children, we see this with children all the time, right? With their parents, this power struggle. And what happens is that nothing gets accomplished. Okay. And usually it ends up in not a win-win situation. And what we want to do is we want to create mutual empowerment.
Got you.
So you never want to take somebody else's power away. In fact, you want to give them the ability to expand on their own personal power. And when we talk about Martin Luther King, mm-hmm. he did that. He stood in his power. He did it with the right voice. He did it with the right stance. He knew how to power up in the right way and how to power down when things got really tough and people were butting heads. And he tried to level again. It's about powering down is about leveling the playing field.
Right. It almost... Like, I wonder how much sort of leadership styles come into play here, right? Or a factor in when we talk about the ability to power up or power down, because personal styles are a big part of this, isn't it?
They are a big part of it because we all have our natural tendencies,
right,
to either power up or power down, and in the way that we're doing it. But the thing is, these are tools that are available to us. So, again, if the only tool you have is a hammer, you see every problem's a nail, right? and the thing with that is that these are tools in our tool chest. So when we talk about powering up or powering down, Women are especially bad at powering down. We come, and even if you just look at powering up and powering down, if we think about the animal kingdom, right?
Okay.
Animals, when they want to power up, they spread out.
Yes.
Right? I mean, they just take up space, right? And powering down is taking little space. Well, we see that in meetings. I love going into a meeting and see who's actually powering up, spreading out their stuff on the table, taking up a lot of space.
Yep.
And many times, especially women, are very bad about their papers are right in front of them. They're crossing their arms. They're sitting little. And sometimes people even come sit next to them, and they'll move their stuff even closer in front of them to make room, right? And
yeah, go ahead.
And the problem is, if you're continually powering down and you're not aware you're doing it, a lot of times you lose your voice.
Right. And that's where you're giving away your power. Is that what exactly happens? And so where people need to be mindful of when that's taking place.
Exactly.
Right. Interesting when you sort of talk about people that sort of spread out. I think for a lot of people, it's just what they just naturally sort of do. And I know so we just talked a moment ago, leadership styles, right? And personal styles. There are people who just sort of naturally take space and those who naturally don't.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But you also need to be aware of that, because you might be in a situation where you're feeling domineering over somebody. My son actually had that at work. He's 25 years old. He came home and he said, "Mom, I think somebody thinks I'm domineering over him. I need to know how to power down." He's, a big boy. He's, over 6 foot. He's broad shoulders, and he was working with a colleague that he worked with that was shorter, smaller of stature. And he says, "I really think that she's feeling that in the power dynamic. So what are some things I can do to help level the playing field so she realized that we're on the same team?"
Right. And in that example, what kind of things did you tell him?
I told him, I said, sit down when you talk to her. Don't stand over her. Try to get to a point where you're sitting down. Be quiet, be more empathetic with her. Try to take up smaller amounts of space. Give her time to talk. Listen to her stories. Mostly it was a lot about physical stuff. Make sure that you're away. Tilt your chin down. Is another one. So when you tilt your head back, and you kind of look over your nose, and you don't have to do it bad, just tilt it back a little bit, it gives you a better stance. But if you tilt it down and you kind of look up at people, it gives you that feeling of being higher or lower.
Yeah.
And it makes a ton of difference. The other thing that I talk about a lot is be aware of how you're using your tone of voice.
Gotcha. Right.
The low voice, right? With lots of pauses.
Yeah.
Very inviting.
Okay.
Whether you talk on the inhale or the exhale makes a difference. So I tell people,
I had never thought of that. No.
Yeah. So if you're, and I always say, think about answering the phone. So like you're in a hurry and you go, "Hello," right? And you're talking on the inhale. And try it. Just say hello as you're breathing in.
Hello.
Okay, now say hello as you're breathing out.
Hello.
How does that feel?
Yeah, you can feel it's a clear difference as you're breathing out. It's more powerful. It's more forceful. It's more almost authoritative.
Exactly. So you get control, and it's of yourself. So I tell people, if you want to harness if you feel like power situations and dynamics are out of control, the first thing you can do is to take a breath in and speak on the exhale. Immediately you will feel back in control.
Oh, that's it. I had never even I've never heard that before. I've never thought about it, but as you say it, like, yeah, that kind of makes sense. I want to jump to the book specifically and tell me what made you write that? Like, was it intended audience, or what were you when you decided to put this on paper? What were you after?
I when I first started the book, I was really gearing it towards women and minorities for them to be able to have a voice. And what we found out as the book has come out and we've talked to people is that it's actually everybody is enjoying it now because power dynamics happen everywhere. And for people who really want to learn, it's not just about, making sure your voice is heard. It's about making sure that the people that you're working with, their voice is being heard. Right. And it has been a lifelong struggle for me. I really wrote the book as a guidebook because as the child of 4 children, or the youngest of 4 children, I should say, my brother was 18 years old, my senior. And what happened was I didn't have a voice in my own household as I grew up. So as a child, I learned to raise my voice, have a temper tantrum, do those things that served me well when I was 2 and 3 years old. Right. But as you got older, I encountered different things that happened in my life that I was seeing these power struggles and didn't know how to handle it. So when I first took a job at a community foundation, I had advanced us. In about a year and a half, I had advanced us to complete our 3-year goals. Okay. Wow. And I thought, that's a great feather. Yeah, sounds pretty good. Yeah. Right. Yeah. I'm going to ask for a raise. So I went to the executive director who was part-time. Okay. And I was the only full-time employee at the time, which was a little bit odd anyway. But basically that translated into I did all the work and he got all the credit, right? Because he was never. It sounds like what you're saying, yeah. He was never in the office, but I thought it was still about time to ask for a raise. So when I went to him and I asked for a raise, he turned and he looked at me and he said, "Well, don't you get child support?" And I crumbled. Wow. I didn't know what to say. I mean, I stuttered. I tried to come up with answers. I tried to bring him back to what I'd done. For period of time, right? I went back to him trying to figure out how to help him to see that. But now I would have handled that so differently. I would have spread out. I would have lowered my voice. I would have kept him on task. I would have looked him straight in the eye and I would have said, what me being a single mother has absolutely nothing to do with the job I'm doing here. Right. And we're not even going to address that. But I didn't know how to do that at the time. I didn't know how to claim my power in the right way. So I ultimately just left the organization. Right. And essentially gave away the power. Exactly. It's so interesting. I think in many people, as I think of myself, I'm sure there's been instances where, I've given my power away, just not recognizing. And sometimes, Gail, you're caught off guard. Like you're just not ready for it. And you're surprised, you're shocked. As in your case, you weren't expecting that type of a response. And so I can understand sometimes when we're not ready, but I think that's part of the power dynamics because you need to be able to know the moments when you can exercise the either power up or powering down principles. Exactly. And to do it in such a way so that everybody wins in the conversation. I coached a girl who was really trying to get a promotion in her organization. And her leader kept saying, "Well, I just don't think you're ready. I just don't think you're ready." And she actually was now in charge of a big project and they were getting together to have a meeting about the project. Now, when they got there, it just so happened quite by accident that she was the only female in the room. Her boss, which was a great boss, I actually know him, said as they were getting ready to sit down, they were doing this over dinner, said, "Well, she's here to take notes." Well, she could have actually just gotten offended, been quiet, not said anything. However, we'd been working on powering up and powering down. And she actually said, she spoke up and she said, "That's right. I'm working and going to be planning out the strategy for this project. So I may be asking you throughout the night to speak up, or I may be, interrupting you for clarification because I want to make sure that we get the absolute best strategy we possibly can." She didn't have to get upset with her boss. She claimed her power and her space there. Yes. She didn't have to get upset and get emotional about it. And wouldn't you know it, a few days later, he called her in and said, "You know what? I think we need to talk about moving you up in a different position." Oh, amazing.
And again, that's just an example of just, exercising your power. And what I love about that, and I'm glad you use that illustration, because oftentimes, especially in the work context, there's because you have a manager, boss, leader, whatever, there's kind of a natural imbalance because they've got the power and you're beneath them, or they're your leader, if you will. But even in those instances, as an individual, I still have my personal power.
Absolutely. We always have it. And it's energy and it's limitless. See, I think what happens a lot of times with us is that we get in our mindset that because somebody says something like that we need to feel lesser than, that somehow we think we're not enough.
Right.
And when we can stand in our personal power, when we know that we're enough, then it can come out. We can demonstrate it in those situations and create those win-win opportunities.
Right. And it's interesting we talk about not being enough, because who knows where that really comes from, Gail? Like, who knows who told us or who planted that seed that we're not enough? But for some people, it doesn't go anywhere. They stick with it. They hold on to it tight and never lets go. But in fact, we just have to recognize that.
We do. We have to think about our own mindset. We have to change it. The other thing that happens a lot of times, then people confuse power with boundaries.
Okay.
You see, boundaries are just limits we set around our time and our energy and our money.
Right.
However, we aren't clear of what our boundaries are, or where we stop and something else ends or begins, right? And we confuse it. When those boundaries get blurred, we confuse them, and then we think that somebody's powering over us, when in fact it's just not us holding our boundaries.
Right. Yeah. And boundaries is also a very important aspect, because it certainly lets other people, this is how far we can go, or this is what I will accept or what I won't accept. And I think when you do that, you mark your territory, then that's setting you up to even put out to further display your power.
I see it all the time where people say, okay, I'm not going to work at night.
Okay.
And the next thing you know, they'll get an email or they'll get a text message and they're answering it. Well, if you're going to tell your colleagues, listen, after 7:00 at night is my family time, then don't be answering emails, right? You've got to hold your boundaries. But then they get mad at the other person because the other person continues to send them emails.
Don't answer. That's exactly. And that illustration, again, that's just a really simple fix. Just don't answer, right? And
don't answer.
Don't create, because we're creating these expectations, right?
Exactly. We really only have the power over ourselves, but we spend a lot of time and energy trying to change other people. But the truth of the matter, the law around power is we only have power over ourselves.
Right.
But if we can change the way we interact with people, then we can change their experience.
Right.
And that's where we can start changing our community, our workplace, our world.
Yeah. Yeah. A big part that, as I see it, is confidence, right? We have to develop our confidence to be able to exercise our power, whether we're going up or down. With the work that you do with your clients, how much time is spent on developing confidence?
Actually, you can apply these techniques without having any confidence that at all. Yep. You start developing the confidence. We work on mindset, we work on boundaries, and then we work on actually being able to display them, spreading out in the spaces, how many notes you take. And what I tell people is to look at these as tools in your toolbox. And then the ones that you don't automatically go to, because there's usually several we automatically go to, take a few and start practicing them. And then what happens is you become more confident, because you start seeing people that behave differently or respond differently.
Yeah.
When you start feeling people pushing against you, then you pull out one of the power down tools.
I mean, for me, the part that sort of kind of excites me a little bit is that it gets to the point where the reaching the toolbox and pulling a necessary tool almost becomes like a natural motion. It's like, you're not really thinking about, okay, so in this scenario, I need to do this. Like, it just happens. And I think that's when you arrive.
Yeah, I was at a facility that I was needing to power up. They weren't helping me very much. It was a
Yep.
car dealership. And I sat down, they set me down at a table and I said, okay, I've got to power up here. They're not being very helpful. So I spread my things out, right? And what I noticed is that when they came to sit down, I, without thinking, went like this and leaned forward. I pulled my body in, right? And I pulled my hands together and leaned forward. And I went, oh, no, you're trying to power up. You need to spread back out again. So I leaned back in my chair instead of leaning forward. But then later, I found that they were, getting a little upset because I was pushing them a little bit. So I leaned forward. And it changed the entire dynamic. So what you're really looking at is, how's the energy flowing? Are people trying to butt or push up against you? And then that's when you power up or power down.
Right. And that does take some time to develop that skill, doesn't it, Gail? I mean, you're very much, especially because the piece about it is sort of reading the room, if you will, to figure out what's happening.
It's awareness of what's going on and feeling that energy. And the thing is, you feel it, you've never thought about it. So you can feel the energy, you can feel how it shifts, but you don't think of it as power. You don't think of it as an energy. You don't think about, okay, I need to keep this in an ebb and flow type of way, because we've never been taught it. It's never been talked about.
Yeah, no, I've never. In fact, I don't know if is there much written about it. There's not a whole lot, is there?
Not a whole lot that I've seen. Yeah.
But
we feel it. We know it.
Well, and that's the thing. That's why at the very beginning I said, can we just sort of talk about what it is, because everyone can kind of relate or have a general understanding of what it is, because it affects us all.
Well, and you can be in a room and somebody walks in the room and the whole energy of the room changes.
Yes,
because they're a famous person, or they something, or they present themselves. Sometimes they're not even famous or hold a high position. They just walk in sure of themselves, standing in their own personal power. That's my goal, is that everybody is standing in their own personal power.
And again, so tying it back to the significance of audaciousness, I mean, that's exactly what that is. Now, it's funny because oftentimes, at least within the context of how I talk about audaciousness here on this podcast, it isn't always like the person that's the most loudest that is seen right away. It's that individual that is stepping into who they truly are and being themselves, but at the same time, they're and I don't like to say you're taking a risk by being yourself, because I don't think you're ever taking a risk if you're being where you're supposed to be. But to a certain degree, there are some risks that you put out there and to demonstrate that level of boldness. And so I think that, again, the power dynamic, it fits directly into what we're talking about here.
Right. I mean, you can be bold and still power down. You can move agendas forward and still power down.
That's actually a really good point, because again, it's normally power is attributed with powering up, right? Yeah.
Sometimes I think that powering down is even more effective than powering up. It's because it's not expected. It's not pushing people back. But when you can understand that you can be in your power and powered down, it's a choice. It's just the other side of the same coin. Then you remain to be powerful and empowered as a human being.
And it's so subtle too, and I think that's what makes it effective, because it's so like you can be demonstrating to someone and they not even know what's happening, right? It's just like, oh, I sort of feel like, all of a sudden it's like you feel something's happening, but you can't label or identify it. So that's why I think it's a really powerful tool.
Yeah, I hope that everybody, pulls out the tools and use them as they can.
Gotcha.
We naturally use them with children, right? We don't even think about it, right?
Good point. Yeah.
We power down by what's one of the things they teach you, right? Get down on their level, right?
Right.
So we do that automatically. We lower our voice. We listen. We become curious as to what they're saying, because they're getting more and more upset. Well, what we don't realize is those tendencies in human beings still happen when they get older.
Right.
We just hide them, right? So we get more and more upset as somebody's pushing back against us, right? But we're keeping a calm face. It's just happening on the inside. And when we think about that this is just the way we're wired up, it's human tendencies, and to be able to respond to them, then we can really enjoy life and the people that we're working with and that we're around.
Yeah. No, I absolutely, I can definitely see that. In your book, you talk about some, funny sort of personalities, if you will. You got really cute names. I'd love for maybe touch on a few of them there, just because I think, I'm sure you'll tell us about them, but certainly when you hear it, I think lots of times people can relate to exactly what we're talking about.
So we did name 6 workplace personalities or scenarios, and I'm always cautious to say we don't want to put labels on people, because if you're going to label somebody, you label them as friend. Because the interesting thing is that when we look at these situations, most people will say, I have names of people behind it, but sometimes we've been them unconsciously. And that's why we want to be able to look at them, because it's a power dynamic. And then once you identify things, then you can deal with them.
Right.
We made them fun. So one of them is the Toxic Pollenator. So think about a little bee, and that's what we did. We have little graphics that go with it. It's a little bee with an interesting little eyebrow. And this is a person that goes around and they talk to somebody here and they talk to somebody else there. And usually it's separate, and they kind of pollinate just a little bit here and there and whatever. And it's not really that they're trying to create trouble, but then all of a sudden what happens is you come back in a meeting and the meeting blows up and you go, where'd all that emotion come from? Right? It's because this person's gone around there. So that's one of them. Another one that I like is the Info Hoarder.
Okay.
So the Info Hoarder is the person that you work with that gives you information for a product or a project that you have going on, but they hold back just a little bit of that information, right? Just enough so you can't actually get the job done great. And then usually they come in at the end, right, with the piece of information, and they come out looking like the hero.
That's right.
I see this a lot in families and siblings taking care of adult parents, even, like you'll have one sibling that'll just hold back a piece of information, right?
Oh, wow.
Another one is one I call the Insulter Offloader.
Insulter Offloader.
Insulter Offloader.
Okay.
And the Insulter Offloader actually kind of goes at our core. So what they do is they deliver an insult to us. Oh, you should have done better at that, or you really missed the mark on that. And then as we are reeling, right, from our feelings getting hurt and wanting to prove that we still have value, that we still can do the job, they actually hand us a task to do and we accept it. And we end up doing their work for them. It's a tactic that I see. And insulters, offloaders, once you identify them, they will never get away with it again once you realize that that's what they do.
So you kind of lower your guard because you're caught up with the emotions and feelings of dealing with what, but there's an ulterior motive at the end.
Exactly.
Very strategic. My goodness.
Very strategic. But people get into their habits, and they just get into them, and that's their kind of motive apparatus.
Yes.
And then the fun one, of course, we can't go probably with all 6 of them, but the fun one that I love, just because it's a fun name, is the Swoop and Poop. And I have to say, I'm very guilty of being a swoop and poop. As a leader in healthcare organizations, I was really bad at that. But a swoop and poop is just somebody that comes in and they create all kinds of havoc. You don't see them very often, but when they come in, they have all kinds of things to say. They're criticizing of people. And because you see them very scarce, they create this emotional havoc, and the team gets into an uproar, and then they disappear just as fast. They just come in and kind of swoop on you and go around. So I think of them as, you remember the movie Top Gun?
Yes. Yeah.
When Maverick and Goose would circle the tower and the coffee would go down the front. I mean, that's kind of the picture of the swoop and poop, is they kind of come in like that. They create all kinds of havoc, create all kinds of trouble, and they're gone just as quick.
Those disruptors, that's what they are, right? Just living to disrupt just because too, there's no real rhyme or reason. Sometimes I think you call them habits. And I think that's a good way of labeling that. And also too, and you talked about not labeling, because I think oftentimes and maybe you can tell me, but people sort of, they're not always just this one. They might be a couple of these or display different traits. And so I think when we get in labels, got to be careful because they could be multiple.
Well, I think labels in general are a bad idea. And that was one of my things when I put them in the book, but it was a great way to describe situations, right? And these kind of power personalities that happen. And like I said, we're very, what's the word I'm looking for? We're very quick. Let's just leave it at that. We're very quick to point the finger and blame other people.
Sure.
When many, many times we're just as guilty at things ourselves. Right. So that's why I say with these personalities that we've all probably been at least one of them, if not several, at some point in time.
That's right. And for some instances, they're just really natural. We didn't really. It's not like no one's intentionally going, "This is what I'm going to do." They're just doing it.
You know, people are good in general, right? Nobody wakes up in the morning and says, I'm going to be mad today, or I'm going to be mean to my coworker today. Right. I mean, that doesn't happen. So a lot of these things are just situations, and people are being human. Right. You know, I love it when you drive down the road, right? And somebody gets mad because somebody accidentally pulled out in front of them. They didn't intend to. Right. But we act as if they do, right?
That's right. That's right. No, and not only do we act as if we do, we connect all sorts of emotion to it, and that takes it to a whole another level.
And guess what? We've just given our power away.
Yeah. That's a good observation. Yep. I love that.
Just giving our power away. I always say, anytime you raise your voice, you give your power away.
Which is interesting because many would say that many would think it's, well, I've got to yell and scream to get my point across. So explain a bit more for Gail, because I think for a lot of people, you know, yelling and screaming actually is an effective tactic, or at least they think it is.
They think it is, but the problem is when you start, nobody likes to be yelled and screamed at. So think about it from the other person who is hearing the yelling and screaming. They've just completely tuned you out. So you've just, what you've done is you're giving yourself sometimes an emotional release, an unhealthy emotional release, right? But it's not helping the entire situation. The other person's just shutting down.
Right.
And then you don't get anything accomplished. And I learned that the hard way. Like I said, you know, when I was young, when I was 5 years old, my brothers and sisters were 18, you know, yelling and screaming got my voice heard. Yeah. You know, fast forward, getting married, yelling and screaming at my husband's not going to have the same effect.
Let's wait for you to stop yelling, like, at some point. Yeah, no, I get it. You know, Gail, off the top, you talked about being a certified trainer, Dr. Cialdini, and I'd like you to touch on that, because I think there's a direct connection when we talk about the persuasion tactics to the topic of power. There's a direct connection between the two. So if you sort of touch on that.
I actually correlate a lot of Dr. Cialdini's work in the 6 principles with the 6 characters and how to deal with them, and intertwine those with powering up and powering down. Yeah. He was very, very instrumental in me, because what had happened was, as I sat through his class, I'm one of his 13 certified trainers. And as I sat and worked with him and talked with him, and what he talks and teaches are really natural tendencies. They're about, and he does it from a point of, we want to enhance relationships. We want to get people, we love life when people say yes to us, and we want to create long-term relationships. So he's very ethical in everything that he teaches. And I loved that. And when I started to look at that, and as one of 2 females and the only female in the United States that's certified under him, I started to see how these principles and these human tendencies and power actually interacted with each other. And that's where I got a lot of the ideas for powering up and powering down.
I think it's just fascinating, because again, I don't know, oftentimes that connection is immediately made. So to know that that served as a core of your work in writing your book, I think it's awesome, because there is a connection, and maybe it's not readily, it comes to you instantly, but when you start thinking it through, absolutely.
Yeah, I think that many people, when they look at those 6 principles of persuasion, they think of them as, or influence, they think of them as kind of a tactic to use at people, but they're not.
Yeah.
There are human tendency. They cross cultures, they cross time.
Yeah.
And when you think about we as humans, we react in certain ways. And many times that's out of our subconscious,
Yes.
not out of our conscious mind. Most of the time we walk around in autopilot. The majority of the time, I think the last statistic I heard was 95% of the time, which is scary. But, we have those tendencies, we react in certain ways. And when you think about that and how that plays into power, how is our relationship with power, and how are we going to react? And what are those things that we just naturally do, and take a look at them.
Yeah, no, and that's a good exercise to go through, to look at that and really do that examination to understand the power and the dynamics and where you fit too, because I think that's a really, because if you sort of stop and sort of analyze your own actions and behaviors and your habits, like we talked about, you get a really good picture of sort of where you fit in, and maybe can answer some questions as to why you're in situations where maybe you're not always coming out win-win, or you're not where you want to be. Like, it could be very well that, couldn't it?
It could very well. And it's a learning opportunity. Remember, life happens through us, not to us.
Oh,
and when we can have the learning opportunity of saying, hey, you know what? I didn't do very well there, but what can I learn from it? How can I change it moving forward? That's when we can really embrace life.
Yeah. No, the book is Power Up, Power Down: How to Reclaim Your Power and how to reclaim your control and make every situation a win-win. And you know what? On the win-win, because every situation can be a win-win, even when it looks like it doesn't. So that's a really big title.
Yeah. And it's a win-win when everybody can walk away with being empowered and holding their own dignity.
Yeah, and that really should be the goal. Like, no one should, no one should come out feeling like they lost, and because that first off is not a win-win, and second, I think it just damages the relationship moving forward. Because if I feel like we're engaged in something and I'm the loser, I'm walking away not really feeling great about you, Gail. You know what I mean?
Exactly, and we can't feel good if we are putting other people in that position. We may think we feel good for a short period of time, but ultimately we don't feel good about who we are when we do that.
Got you. Oh, so awesome, Gail. Listen, this has been such a wonderful chat. Again, the conversation of power, I said before, it's so relevant to what we talk about here. And it's interesting that, when I came across your book, I've not really seen a whole lot. And as you said, there's not much written on the topic. But I do think there's some relevancy, certainly, and there's some opportunities for people to learn some really cool stuff.
Well, and it was written as a guidebook, so people could actually take it and walk away, so that people can be more empowered. And hopefully with your audience, we've given them something they can walk away with and feel empowered.
Amazing. So for our listeners, if they wanted to check out your book or catch up with you and your work, where can we send them, Gail?
You know what? They can go to my website at gailrudolph.com. And Power Up, Power Down is available in every avenue that you can get books: Amazon, Barnes and Noble.
Amazing. Must be exciting.
It is very exciting. I just made the Wall Street Journal and the USA Today best-selling list.
Congratulations.
So considering the paperback came out on October 12th, I think this is a topic our world is looking to hear and learn about.
Absolutely. I think when you look at sort of where we're at, and I think that's another really good point, where we're at as society as a whole. I think this is an important topic, and I think right now, sort of anything in the human relations field is something that we need to pay attention to, because so much there's a lot of fracture going on. There's two sides. There's a lot of that kind of stuff. So this is relevant.
Yeah. And I think that, people that are not feeling good about themselves lash out. They always say hurting people hurt others, right? So if we can actually gain our own interpersonal power, then I think that we can actually move forward as a society.
Oh, amazing. Well, that's a great topic and a great way to close. Gail, thank you so much for being here on the Audacious Living podcast. It was a pleasure. All the best and continued success.
Thank you so much for having me. It was my pleasure.
Take care. Back we are here on the podcast, and I really appreciate you, Gail, for taking some time and joining us here on the Audacious Living podcast to not only expand our knowledge of power, but to also help us to better understand the importance of what powering up and powering down really is all about. I think knowing when to use these trusty tools that we have in our toolbox serves as an excellent way of getting us all to a win-win state. You know, Gail left us with so much to think about, but if I reflect on our conversation, I think about what that one takeaway would be. It would be this. Our personal power is one of those things that exists inside all of us, but isn't visible in the same manner that we can't see the power that charges our cell phone when we plug it in. While many may seem to think that the origin of power is tied into our position, title, or role, it's actually much deeper than that. Essentially, our personal power is a source of influence and authority a person has over his or her followers. It's based on strength, confidence, and competence that individuals gradually acquire over the course of their personal development. Again, it's something that we all have inside of us. Personal power plays a big part into our ability to be successful and happy. It also helps us to get what we want, feel safe, and remain confident that we are playing a part in this world and not that the world is playing us. The important thing to remember is that power is at play in every single situation. Hey, listen, if you haven't registered for email notifications of the podcast, please know that you can do so simply by heading over to bestaudaciouslife.com, and all you've got to do is enter in your email address and you'll be immediately connected. It's just that easy. You know, we've reached the end of another episode of the Audacious Living podcast. And as always, I want to thank my incredible listeners. You guys are so awesome. I appreciate your dedication. I appreciate your support and appreciate your feedback. That's what keeps this thing going. And that I encourage you, continue to do your part, and we will do the same here. So all those lovers of audaciousness, I say thank you. Until next time, stay safe, be kind.
You've been listening to the Audacious Living Podcast, hosted by Audley Stevenson. If you enjoyed what you heard, be sure to like, subscribe, and share. Until next time, be audacious.